She was left at the altar with a letter in her hands and hundreds of eyes, slicing through her skin like blades, betrayed by her best friend, humiliated in front of everyone, and just when there was nowhere left to run, an unexpected man stood up, not to rescue her, but to give her back what the world had stolen, dignity. But what happened next? No one could have seen coming. If this story touches your heart, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, where are you listening from? Your support is what keeps this channel alive, and stories like this reaching you. The chapel smelled of white roses and nervous anticipation. Guests filled the pews, gently fanning themselves with embroidered programs. A soft piano melody floated beneath the carved arches, like a lullaby. The aisle, lined with petals and gold-trimmed lanterns, waited in silence. Everyone was waiting for her. Isabelle stood just behind the chapel doors, clutching a bouquet that trembled in her hands. At 18, she looked like a dream wrapped in silk and lace. Her brown eyes shimmered, not with joy, but with a fear she couldn't name. She adjusted her veil, trying to steady her breath, while the coordinator whispered, "Ready, darling?" She wasn't, but she nodded. The doors opened, gasps, smiles, discreetly raised phones. Isabelle took her first step down the aisle, her heart pounding against her ribs. Ryan was waiting at the altar, her childhood sweetheart, the one who had promised her forever when they were just 16, the boy who said he'd love her even when her hair turned gray. Only Ryan wasn't there. The best man stood alone, glancing nervously at the side door. The priest shifted uncomfortably. A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd like a slow-burning fuse. Isabelle kept walking, confused, until she reached the altar and looked around, her breath catching. Then the best man stepped forward, pale, hesitant, and handed her a sealed envelope. Everyone watched in stunned silence. She opened it. Her hands shook. "I'm sorry, Isa, I can't do this. Melissa is pregnant. I have to do what's right. Please forgive me someday." Her knees nearly buckled. Melissa, her best friend. Every eye in the room burned through her, whispering, recording. Phones raised even higher. Faces blurred into a storm of pity, shock, and cruel fascination. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The priest tried to reach for her arm, but she stepped back, dizzy. The bouquet slipped from her hands and hit the marble floor with a soft, final thud. It should have ended there. But then someone stood up. A man in the front row rose, calm, composed. His presence swallowed the chaos around him. Sharp jaw, silver cufflinks, eyes like stone and fire. He walked toward her slowly, deliberately, like a man with nothing to prove and everything to protect. Lorenzo Moretti. The name rippled through the room in hushed awe. The most powerful man in the region. A billionaire, untouchable, rumored to be ruthless in business and unreachable emotionally. And now, standing in front of a humiliated girl in a wedding gown, without a word, he removed his tailored black coat and gently draped it around her trembling shoulders. Then, in a voice only she could hear, he said, "No one deserves to be left like this." He turned to the crowd, his expression unreadable. "The show's over, go home." No one dared to defy him. People began to leave. Phones were lowered, voices faded. Lorenzo placed a steady hand on her back and guided her gently down the steps, shielding her from every stare, every whisper, every cruel lens. Outside, the sun burned too bright. Isabelle's face was frozen in pain, stunned eyes, tear-streaked cheeks. She still held the crumpled letter in her hand. "Where do you want to go?" Lorenzo asked, unlocking his sleek black car. She shook her head. "I don't know." He opened the door. "Then come with me. Until you do." It wasn't a question. She hesitated because everything about him felt like danger wrapped in safety. But when she looked back at the chapel, the people still peeking through the windows, still laughing, still whispering, she nodded. The drive began in silence. She stared out at the passing vineyards, clutching the coat wrapped around her like a shield. It smelled of cedar and something colder, harder to name. He didn't ask about the letter. He didn't offer hollow words. He just drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the gear shift, steady as stone. It wasn't until they began to climb the hills that she finally spoke. "Why did you help me?" He didn't look at her. "Because I know what it's like to be abandoned." Those words hit harder than Ryan's letter. When they arrived at his estate, a breathtaking mansion nestled among vines and mist, she didn't ask how long she could stay. She didn't ask what came next. All she knew was she had nowhere else to go. And for the first time in hours, she felt safe. But as the iron gates closed behind them and the mansion swallowed her whole, Isabelle couldn't help but wonder, who was this man who had saved her? And what had he seen in her shattered silence that made him care at all? The sun dipped behind the hills as Lorenzo's car glided up the curved drive, casting long shadows across the gravel. The mansion stood like a fortress, elegant, distant, wrapped in the kind of silence that didn't ask questions. Isabelle stepped out slowly, still barefoot from the chapel, Lorenzo's coat clinging to her like armor. Her veil had come undone during the drive and now rested in her lap, a crumpled ghost. She stared at the grand entrance, glass doors, marble columns, ivy-covered walls, and wondered if she was about to disappear into a stranger's world, or into herself. Sophia greeted them first. Short, silver-haired, with eyes that had seen everything, she opened the door before they even knocked, as if she already knew. No questions, no judgment, just warmth. She gently touched Isabelle's hand and led her in with a tenderness that didn't need words. The house smelled of polished wood and jasmine. Soft lights glowed overhead. The floors shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers. It wasn't cold, as Isabelle had expected. It felt still, not empty, not sterile, just still. "You'll stay in the east wing," Lorenzo said softly. "Plenty of morning light." She looked at him, unsure of what to say. The letter, the gasps, the pain, it all still swirled around her like smoke. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. He didn't hesitate. "Because I know what that kind of pain can do to someone. And because no one else stood up." There was no pity in his voice, just understanding, real lived-in pain. Sophia helped her settle into a guest room, wrapped in white linen and soft velvet. A tray of warm soup and bread waited by the window. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful. Then the tears came, hot, quiet, endless. Sophia sat beside her without asking questions. She just offered a handkerchief and rubbed Isabelle's back with a mother's patience. When Isabelle finally spoke, her voice cracked. "He was supposed to love me forever." Sophia didn't answer. She only looked at her with a kindness that said, "You are still worthy of love," even if someone forgot how to see it. That night, Isabelle couldn't sleep. She wandered barefoot through the marble halls, her fingers brushing the frames on the walls. Family portraits, Italian landscapes. She didn't know, but past the staircase, she heard a piano, soft, hesitant, like someone relearning how to speak. She followed the sound to a room with slightly open French doors. Under a warm light, Lorenzo sat at the piano, eyes closed, fingers moving gently across the keys. It wasn't a performance, it was private, imperfect, honest. He looked up but kept playing. Couldn't sleep either. She stepped inside. "No, everything's too loud in my head." He nodded. "Silence is a muscle, not a gift. Takes time to strengthen." She didn't quite understand, but she held on to the words. Then she asked, "Did someone leave you too?" His hands stilled. "My wife, a long time ago. She took everything when she left, including my son." The room went still. "I'm sorry," Isabelle said softly. He looked at her then, not at the gown, the bare feet, or the ruined makeup, but at the girl beneath it all. "You remind me of him," he said gently. "Not in looks, but in the way he always forgave too easily." She sank into a nearby chair. "Do you think forgiving makes us weak?" "No," he said, returning to the keys. "I think it makes us human. But forgetting? That's where we lose ourselves." A quiet fell between them, not heavy, not awkward, just shared. When she returned to her room, she found a folded blanket at the foot of her bed and a book on the nightstand. The Little Prince. Inside, a note read, "You are not broken. You are becoming." She didn't recognize the handwriting, but it made her chest ache. The next morning, birdsong spilled through the open window, and Sophia knocked softly, bringing breakfast. There were no calls, no headlines, no reminders of yesterday's disgrace. Just warm sunlight and the smell of citrus trees. And for the first time in forever, Isabelle closed her eyes, not from pain, but from peace. But as she stood at the window later, watching Lorenzo cross the garden in his tailored suit, phone pressed to his ear, face unreadable, one thought lingered in her mind. Who was this man who had everything, yet lived surrounded by silence? And what had made him stop for her, a girl in a ruined, veiled with a heart in pieces, when the rest of the world only saw a spectacle? The first few days at the Moretti estate unfolded like scenes from a silent film, beautiful, quiet and strangely unreal. Isabelle moved through the halls like a ghost in borrowed skin. Sophia had given her clean clothes, soft pajamas, and delicate toiletries that smelled of lavender and rosemary. Everything was luxurious, yet understated. No gold-plated displays, no flashy declarations of wealth. Just quiet elegance like everything in Lorenzo's world. Each morning began with sunlight spilling through the tall windows of her guest room, painting the cream-colored walls in golden hues. A breakfast tray would appear at the same time each day, delivered with a soft knock and a gentle smile from Sophia. Isabelle never saw the rest of the staff. It was as if the house itself honored her need for solitude. On the third day, she wandered into the garden. It was vast, a green expanse that stretched further than her eyes could follow. Olive trees swayed beside rows of white roses, and a cobblestone path curved around a small fountain where birds came to drink. She sat on a bench beneath a blooming wisteria and tried to reread The Little Prince. But her eyes kept drifting toward the sky. She hadn't cried that day. It felt like a small victory. Lorenzo remained mostly in the background. He came and went in sleek black cars, spoke in low tones on his phone, and always wore the same composed expression. But there were signs, subtle, easy to miss, that he was paying attention. The bookshelf in her room was rearranged. New titles appeared overnight: Austen, Bronte, Ferrante, as if someone had quietly guessed her taste. A silk shawl appeared on the armchair after she caught a chill. And one morning, she found a bowl of raspberries on her windowsill, just like the ones her mother used to bring home from the farmer's market. He never mentioned these gestures, neither did she, but they settled between them like an unspoken agreement. That afternoon, Isabelle returned to the music room. The piano sat in the sunlight like a sleeping creature. She touched one of the keys, a soft, tentative note that felt like breath. Behind her, a voice asked, "Do you play?" She turned. Lorenzo was standing in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. For a moment, he didn't look like the man who filled headlines. He looked tired, human. "Not really," she replied. "Just a few things I learned when I was a girl." He stepped inside. "Try something." She sat, letting her fingers hover above the keys. She closed her eyes and let them find a melody, uneven, fragile, but real. It was a lullaby her mother used to hum when storms rattled the windows. When she finished, she didn't open her eyes right away. "That was beautiful," he said. She looked at him, surprised. "It was messy. Most beautiful things are." A strange warmth settled in her chest. Not yet affection, not trust, but something soft enough to melt the ice around her heart. That evening, as the sky turned shades of lavender and rose, Sophia invited her to the dining room. It was the first time the long table was set for more than one. "Mr. Moretti wondered if you'd like to join him tonight," Sophia said gently. "Only if you want to." Isabelle hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I would." The meal was simple yet elegant: roasted vegetables, risotto, warm bread. They ate mostly in silence until Lorenzo asked, "Do you miss home?" She looked up, unsure how to answer. "I'm not sure where home is anymore." He studied her face, then said, "Sometimes we build new ones where the old ones fall apart." His words stayed with her. Over dessert, tiramisu and espresso, he added, "You don't have to stay forever, Isabelle. But while you're here, this house is yours too." That night, Isabelle stood by her window, staring out at the moonlit vineyard with a strange ache in her chest. Not sadness, not grief. Something more complicated, like being seen for the first time in a long while. And for the first time since that awful day at the altar, She whispered aloud, "Thank you." No one heard. No one needed to. The mansion didn't ask questions. Lorenzo didn't demand explanations. And somewhere between the silence, the music, and the morning light, Isabelle felt something in her slowly begin to return. But just as she started to breathe again, just as her heart began to soften, she passed a hallway she hadn't noticed before. A hallway that led to a door with a name carved into the wood. Matthew. And suddenly, all of Lorenzo's silences felt heavier than before. The name haunted her. Matthew. Isabelle froze in the hallway, her hand hovering near the doorknob but never touching it. There was something sacred about the silence behind that door, as if even time itself had been asked to stay away. She stepped back and returned to her room, but sleep wouldn't come that night. The name echoed in her chest, linking itself to Lorenzo's quiet stares, his small gestures, his sadness that had never been spoken out loud. The next morning, the air felt colder. At breakfast, Sophia noticed. "You saw the door," she said gently, pouring tea into a porcelain cup. "Did you open it?" Isabelle shook her head. "No, but I felt the weight of it." Sophia's hands paused for a moment, then, with the kind of reverence reserved for deep sorrow, she said Matthew was his son. The words dropped like stones into still water. "He was just 6, Sophia continued, curious, full of questions, always asking about stars and trees. He looked exactly like Lorenzo. What happened?" Isabelle asked, barely above a whisper. "A car accident. His mother was driving. They'd had an argument that morning. She left in the rain and the road curved too sharply." Silence fell again. Sophia didn't need to explain more. Some grief speaks for itself, in the eyes, the posture, the long pauses between words. Later that day, Isabelle wandered back to the hallway. The door was still closed. She didn't touch it. She just stood there for a while before turning away. She couldn't intrude, not yet. But that evening, Lorenzo found her on the terrace. He stood beside her as the sun dipped low behind the hills, the vineyard glowing in soft gold and violet. He didn't ask why she looked shaken. He already knew. "You saw his room," he said. She nodded, eyes on the horizon. "I didn't go in." Hands in his pockets, he stared straight ahead. "I can't bring myself to change anything. It still smells like him." Isabelle looked at him, really looked. Not at the tailored suit or the reputation, but at the man beneath it all. A man who had loved and lost, and buried his pain so deep even he could barely touch it. "I'm sorry," she said. With everything she had, he exhaled. "Everyone says that, but no one knows what to say after." She didn't try to say anything. Instead, she placed her hand gently on his forearm. A quiet gesture, just enough to be felt. They stood there in silence. "I was supposed to pick him up from school that day," Lorenzo said. "But I got caught up, meetings, calls, so she went instead. And now they're both gone." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried a grief that had learned how to survive in public. "She didn't die in the crash," he added, almost like a confession. "She survived. But she left. Said she couldn't look at me anymore. Said I reminded her of everything she'd lost." Isabelle's heart ached. Everything made sense now. The silence, the restraint, the late-night music, the cautious kindness. It all belonged to a man who had once loved deeply and paid dearly for it. "Do you blame yourself?" she asked softly. He looked at her, truly looked. "Every day." She didn't try to fix it. No empty comfort, no hollow phrases. She simply stood beside him, two wounded souls under a violet sky, holding space for each other. And then she said, "Maybe we're both trying to unlearn the idea that love always ends in abandonment." He turned toward her, just enough to meet her eyes. "Maybe." They stayed there as the stars came out, quiet, steady, blinking above the vineyard like little promises. That night, Isabelle didn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't fear. It wasn't grief. It was something else, something stirring inside her like hope tiptoeing back in. She returned to the hallway, stood before the door marked Matthew, still didn't open it. But this time she whispered, "You mattered. You still do." Then she returned to her room, leaving behind a silence that didn't hurt anymore, one that healed. And when she opened her curtains the next morning, a single white flower rested on her windowsill. No note, no explanation, but she knew exactly who had left it. The days passed with a rhythm Isabelle had never known, gentle, unhurried, and quiet enough for her thoughts to breathe. It felt like the Moretti estate existed outside of time. No one asked her to be strong. No one rushed her grief. Here healing didn't come through grand gestures, but in the soft certainty of being safe. One morning, as she sat in the garden sketching the vineyard, with the pencil Sophia had quietly left on her desk, Lorenzo joined her. He didn't sit too close. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there with his hands in his pockets, watching the sunlight move across the hills like a blessing. "You draw," he said finally. "Not well," she replied, not looking up. "But it helps me see things clearly." He nodded as if he understood, then handed her a crisp envelope. She raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "An offer." She opened it slowly. Inside, written in clean, thoughtful language, was a proposal. 3 months. She would accompany him to official events, charity galas, diplomatic dinners, business functions. No expectations, no performance, just presence. In return, he would provide her with financial independence, a stipend, a private account and resources to pursue any future she desired afterward. She looked up, stunned. "Why would you offer me this?" He met her gaze without hesitation. "Because your story isn't over. And sometimes the best way to reclaim your voice is to be seen." She read through the terms again. There was no mention of romance, no fine print, no hidden trap. Just clarity, just respect. "I don't know how to be that kind of woman," she said quietly. "Elegant, powerful, untouchable." "You don't have to be untouchable," he replied. "You just have to show them you're no longer breakable." That afternoon, she sat with Sophia in the sunroom, the contract resting beside her tea. "I don't want to pretend to be someone I'm not," Isabelle admitted. Sophia smiled softly. "Then don't. Let them see the woman you're becoming. And maybe that was the point. It wasn't about faking confidence or wearing designer gowns. It was about reclaiming her image, taking back the power that humiliation had stolen." So she signed. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It began with posture, the way she held her chin, the way she walked into a room. Then came the wardrobe, curated by a discreet stylist Lorenzo trusted. Dresses that fit like armor, heels that taught her to balance again, soft fabrics, bold colors. Then came the language, public speaking lessons, etiquette training, practice interviews in front of mirrors. Not to change who she was, but to bring out the parts of her that had been silenced. All the while, Lorenzo remained present but never overbearing. He watched without pushing, encouraged without pressure, advised without control. In the evenings, they occasionally shared quiet dinners. She began asking about his work, his travels, his view of people. He answered honestly, sometimes with cynicism, always with clarity. "You don't believe in second chances, do you?" she asked him once. "I believe in earned ones," he replied. "And I believe you're already earning yours." At night in her room, Isabelle would sometimes stare at her reflection and wonder who she was becoming. Not a version of who she used to be. Not a performance of power, but something new, something whole. The first official event came sooner than expected, a diplomatic dinner hosted by the Italian embassy. Lorenzo was expected, and now so was she. The car ride was quiet. She wore a deep emerald gown with an open back, her hair pinned in a soft bun, her eyes outlined with a confidence she didn't know she had. As they stepped into the flashes of the press, Lorenzo looked at her. "They'll stare," he said simply. "Let them." She didn't flinch at the cameras, didn't stumble on the red carpet. She walked beside him, her hand gently resting on his arm, her gaze forward, steady and unapologetic. Inside, the room sparkled with chandeliers and politics. All eyes were on them, watching, whispering, calculating, and then she saw them. Ryan, Melissa, seated in a corner holding hands. Both pale, both frozen when they saw her. But Isabelle didn't look away. She walked past them with a grace that wasn't rehearsed. She didn't smile, didn't sneer, didn't stop. She just held her head high and took her seat beside Lorenzo as if she belonged there. Because now she did. The evening unfolded like a quiet triumph. She spoke Italian when introduced to the ambassador. She laughed at the right moments. She listened, engaged, held her ground. And when someone brought up that unfortunate wedding, she said simply, "Sometimes what breaks us is also what remakes us." Lorenzo glanced at her with something unreadable in his eyes. Admiration. Respect? Something deeper? They left just before midnight. The car ride home was silent, yet electric. When they arrived at the estate, she stepped out first. At the door, she turned to him. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing more in me than I saw in myself." He looked at her, voice low. "I didn't see more. I just waited for you to see it too." And as she walked into the house, heels tapping on marble, her dress trailing behind like the end of a long chapter. She didn't know it yet, but everything had changed. The footage went viral within hours. A slow-motion video of Isabelle descending the marble steps at the Italian embassy. Emerald gown hugging her figure, chin high, eyes glowing, spread across social media. Headlines followed like whispered confessions. Abandoned bride returns triumphant. "Who is the woman beside Lorenzo Moretti?" For the first time since that public humiliation, Isabelle wasn't just a headline, she was the story. At the mansion, she watched it unfold from a quiet corner of the library. Sophia sat beside her, knitting as if the world weren't ablaze with the image of the girl who had once been broken, now standing tall. "People are going to talk," Isabelle said softly. "Let them," Sophia replied. "They talked when you fell. Let them talk while you rise." It wasn't vanity Isabelle felt. It was something deeper, a reclaiming, a quiet victory. But it wasn't until she saw Brian's face again that she realized just how much she had changed. It happened at the annual fundraiser for the Women's Literacy Initiative, a grand event attended by ambassadors, CEOs, and foreign dignitaries. Lorenzo was a major patron. Isabelle had helped plan the event herself. She wore a navy gown that shimmered like midnight and diamonds, that had once belonged to Lorenzo's grandmother. He'd placed the velvet box on her vanity with a simple note. "For a woman who speaks louder in silence than others do in speeches." She had smiled, touched but unsure if she could accept such beauty. But when she entered that ballroom, the weight of those jewels didn't feel like pressure. They felt like her story. Ryan stood across the room, clinging to Melissa like a shadow. Their eyes met. She didn't flinch, didn't smile, just acknowledged him the way you acknowledge an old photo. Something once important, now just the past. He walked toward her after dinner, nervous, his mouth ready to speak. But she got there first. "Ryan," she said calmly, "I hope you're doing well." He blinked. "You look free," she offered. He nodded, sheepish. "I didn't think you'd become this." "Neither did I," she replied with a soft shrug. "But maybe I always was." She turned and walked away, back to Lorenzo's side. "You handled that well," he said, handing her a glass of champagne. "I'm not angry anymore," she said. "Just done." It was true. She had crossed an invisible threshold, not into perfection, but into power. Not power that controls others, but power that comes from knowing who you are, even when the world tells you otherwise. Isabelle had grown into herself like a garden, healing after frost, slow, steady, quietly unstoppable. At home, she painted again, not the delicate sketches of sorrow she once drew, but bold colors, strong shapes, and strokes that told stories without a single word. Sophia hung the first canvas in the hallway without asking. "This house needs your voice," she said simply. Lorenzo began noticing too, the way Isabelle spoke in meetings, the way she negotiated sponsorships for new projects, the way she stood in rooms full of powerful men without shrinking. But most of all, he noticed her laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was real, like music returning to a house that had forgotten what it sounded like. One evening after an opera in San Francisco, Lorenzo pulled the car over at a lookout above the bay. The sky was silver and indigo, the city lights blinking below like scattered stars. "Why did you really choose me for this arrangement?" she asked, watching the water. He waited before answering. "Because you reminded me of something I thought I'd lost. Dignity in the middle of collapse, grace when no one's watching, fire beneath ashes." She turned toward him. "And now?" He met her eyes. "Now I see someone I never want to lose." Her breath caught, not because of the words, but because of how gently he said them, as if they were sacred. That night in her room, Isabelle stood at the mirror. She removed the earrings, stepped out of the gown, looked at herself, not with the eyes of the girl who had been abandoned, but with the eyes of the woman she had become. She traced her collarbone and whispered the truth. She no longer feared. I'm not the girl they remember. I'm the woman they never saw coming. And just as she reached to turn off the light, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Lorenzo. No jacket, sleeves rolled, his eyes quiet but burning. He didn't say a word. He just looked at her, long enough for silence to say what he hadn't yet dared. And in that breath between seconds, everything shifted. What had started as protection was about to cross into something far more dangerous and infinitely more tender. The knock on the door still echoed in her chest. Isabelle stood there, a heartbeat too long, eyes locked with Lorenzo's. He hadn't said a word. He didn't need to. His presence alone filled the silence with questions. She wasn't ready to ask and answers. She wasn't sure she wanted to hear. Then with a quiet nod, he stepped back. Good night. Isabelle, he said, his voice low, almost careful. She watched him disappear down the hall, the sound of his footsteps soft against the polished floor. When her door clicked shut, she leaned against it, her heartbeat louder than it should have been. She barely slept that night. The next morning arrived wrapped in fog and the scent of jasmine. The air had shifted, cooler now, touched by autumn's breath. Isabelle walked barefoot across the garden stones, her robe brushing her ankles, a cup of coffee warming her hands. She wasn't running anymore, but she hadn't dared name what was beginning between her and Lorenzo. It wasn't protection, it wasn't gratitude. It was something fragile and terrifyingly real. Sophia watched from the kitchen window, lips curved in a knowing smile. By the following week, they were scheduled to attend a cultural gala hosted by the Italian Art Museum. Isabelle had curated a small exhibition of female artists from Tuscany for the event. It was the first time she had put her name, her ideas on something public. And Lorenzo? He had simply asked, "Do you want your name on the brochure or the wall plaque?" She chose both. That night, he stood beside her the way he always did, effortlessly elegant, reserved, commanding. But something had changed. The way his gaze lingered on her when she wasn't looking. The way his hand brushed hers a moment too long as he guided her through the crowd. They weren't pretending anymore. At one point, as she spoke to an ambassador about a painting's meaning, Lorenzo stood just behind her watching. There was pride in his expression, but there was something else too. Something softer, something he no longer tried to hide. After the speeches, the orchestra began to play. Guests moved to the center of the marble hall, dancing beneath chandeliers. Isabelle stood off to the side, sipping sparkling water, when Lorenzo appeared behind her. "Dance with me." It wasn't a command. It wasn't even a question. It was a request, one heavy with meaning. She hesitated just a second before placing her hand in his. The moment they stepped into the light, a hush fell over the room. Heads turned, phones lifted discreetly. But Isabelle didn't care. Not tonight. His hand rested gently on the small of her back. Her fingers intertwined with his. They moved in sync, slow and steady, the rest of the world fading into muted tones and soft music. "I was afraid of this," she whispered. "Of what?" "That I'd fall for the man who saved me." He looked down at her, eyes burning with something unspoken. "I didn't save you, Isabelle. You did that yourself." Their steps slowed. The orchestra shifted into a tender, nostalgic melody. And then he stopped dancing. Still holding her close, he reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her breath hitched. He looked into her eyes, not for permission, but for truth. And when he kissed her, it wasn't sudden. It was inevitable. A slow, deliberate kiss that carried every unspoken promise, every glance, every breath they'd shared since the day she was left at the altar. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Flashes burst. But none of it mattered, because in that moment, under crystal light and layers of expectation, nothing else existed. When they pulled apart, she looked up at him, shaken but steady. "Now what?" she whispered. He smiled just slightly. "Now we stop pretending." They didn't stay much longer. The ride back was quiet, but not empty, charged. At the mansion, he walked her to her room as always. But this time he didn't leave. He paused at the threshold, eyes locked on hers, not searching for desire but for depth. She reached for his hand. "Stay, just stay." He did, but not in the way the world would assume. They lay side by side on the bed, still dressed, his arm draped around her shoulders. Her head rested on his chest. His heartbeat calmed hers. Their breaths fell into rhythm. There were no roles, no contracts, no shields, just two souls, still wounded, still healing, who had found peace in the wreckage. At some point she whispered, "I don't want to lose myself in this." And he answered without hesitation, "Then I'll hold you in a way that makes you more of who you are." That night she fell asleep in his arms. No nightmares, no tears, just peace. But outside the mansion, beyond the still vineyards and quiet moonlight, the world was watching, and the kiss that had changed everything was about to echo louder than either of them expected. The morning after unfolded in gentle silence. Sunlight crept through the curtains, striping the floor in soft gold. Isabelle stirred slowly, blinking against the light, waking to the unfamiliar comfort of not being alone. Lorenzo was still beside her, fully dressed from the night before, one arm protectively around her, breath steady. It wasn't intimacy born of desire, it was trust. She watched him sleep for a moment. Without his usual guarded expression, he looked young, as if beneath the billionaire exterior was still a man who remembered how to dream. When he opened his eyes, he didn't flinch. He smiled. Not the one he wore at events or in boardrooms. This one was soft, honest, almost unsure. "Good morning," he said, his voice husky with sleep. She smiled. "Good morning?" No awkward questions. No rush to label what had happened. They got up, ate a breakfast in the garden, let the day unfold like any other. Except something between them had shifted, not in a way the world could see, but in a way they couldn't ignore. That evening, as golden light bathed the Napa Valley hills, Lorenzo led Isabelle down a long corridor in the mansion, to a part of the house she hadn't entered before. He stopped at a set of tall double doors. "I want to show you something, but only if you're ready." She nodded, heart racing. "I'm ready." The doors opened to a room preserved in time. Matthew's room. It was untouched. A child's world frozen in memory. Wooden airplanes dangled from the ceiling. A Lego castle waited half-built on the rug. Books leaned crooked on the shelves. A worn teddy bear sat on the windowsill, faded by sun. Isabelle stepped in softly. Her throat tight. "He loved space," Lorenzo said behind her. "Wanted to be an astronaut, or a magician, or a firefighter. It changed every week." She turned to him. "It's beautiful." "It's the last place," he laughed, he said. "We were building that castle." He insisted on a secret room, said every real castle needs one. His eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. She ran her fingers along a photo on the shelf. Matthew and Lorenzo, mid-splash near a pool, both laughing, frozen in joy. "Do you come here often?" she asked. "Not enough," he admitted. "But sometimes, when I miss him too much, I sit here. I let myself remember." She turned to him. "That's not weakness, Lorenzo. That's love surviving." He sat on the edge of the bed. "When he died, something in me broke. And when Camilla, my ex-wife, left, it was like losing him all over again." She said I was too cold. Maybe I was. Isabelle knelt beside him. "You weren't cold. You were grieving." He looked at her, his voice breaking. "And now?" She covered his hand with hers. "Now, you're still healing, like me," he exhaled. "I didn't plan on you, Isabelle." She smiled softly. "I didn't plan on you either." That night, they sat on the floor of Matthew's room, backs against the bed, trading stories. She told him about summer storms, about childhood books, about how she once believed love came with fairy tales, and how it didn't. He told her about holding Matthew for the first time, about the silence after the accident, about the day he stopped believing anything beautiful could last. Until her. "You came in like a storm," he said, "and I didn't even know I needed rain." Tears welled in her eyes. "You gave me shelter when I had none." He touched her cheek. "You were never nothing, Isabelle. You were just waiting for someone to remind you." And there, in that sacred room, surrounded by the memory of the little boy who changed his life, Lorenzo kissed her again. But this time, it wasn't about possession, it was reverence. Later, Isabelle stood by the window, watching stars bloom above the hills. "Do you think Matthew would have liked me?" she asked. Lorenzo came behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "He would have adored you. You would have read books, built castles, filled this place with laughter." She leaned back into him. "Then maybe we're not just healing each other. Maybe we're healing what was left behind." He said nothing. He just held her tighter, but outside, in the quiet corners of the world, not everyone was ready to let them heal in peace. And neither of them knew the past hadn't finished knocking. A single envelope changed everything. It arrived on a crisp October morning, slipped under Isabelle's door by Sophia, who said nothing, just offered a quiet, knowing smile. The paper was thick, cream-colored, with elegant black lettering from a university in Milan. Isabelle stared at it for a long time before opening it, her heart pounding like distant thunder. She didn't cry when she read the words. She just sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the letter. The phrase, "accepted with full scholarship," echoing in her chest like a secret finally said aloud. It was the dream she'd whispered to herself for years. Long before Ryan, before the altar, even before Lorenzo. Literature, language, a master's in Italian poetry. A life that felt entirely her own. Barefoot, she walked down the hallway, the letter still in her hand, sunlight spilling across the polished floor. She found Lorenzo in the library, reading with one leg crossed over the other, glasses low on his nose, the picture of calm. He looked up as she entered. She held out the letter silently. He read it, then looked at her and smiled. Not the smile of someone surprised, but of someone who had always believed in her. "I always wondered what you'd look like when you realized you could fly," he said softly. She let out a shaky laugh, relief and fear tangled in her chest. "It's real. Yes, and you should go." The words hit harder than she expected. "Just like that?" He set the letter down gently. "Isabelle, this has always been yours. I never meant to keep you here. But I'm not the same girl who arrived," she said. "I don't know if I can leave this version of me behind." He walked over, cupped her face in his hands. "Then don't. Take her with you." Her eyes shimmered. "And what about you?" He brushed his thumb along her cheek. "I'll still be here, this house, this vineyard. They've held silence long before you came, and they'll wait after." She understood. He was giving her freedom, even if it broke his own heart. They didn't speak of it again that day, but the air between them changed. Every moment was tinged with a sweetness too heavy to name. Every glance lingered. Every touch held a little longer. Every silence said what neither of them dared. A few days later, they had dinner beneath the stars. Just the two of them. No galas, no obligations. Just Chianti, candlelight, and a playlist she had made of old Italian ballads. He poured her wine and raised his glass. To beginnings, she clinked hers gently. And to not letting fear become the end. They talked for hours, about books, regrets, what healing really felt like. He told her about springtime in Florence. She confessed she'd hidden a notebook of poems under her mattress since she was 13. At one point, she laughed so hard she spilled wine on her dress. He reached for a napkin, gently dabbing the stain, so tenderly it made her chest ache. "I don't want to go," she said softly. "But you need to," he replied. "Because your dreams were never meant to be postponed. Not even for me." Tears threatened, but she didn't let them fall. She nodded. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring, not a diamond. Nothing flashy, a sapphire, deep blue, like the night sky over the vineyard. She looked at him, wide-eyed. "I'm not asking for anything now," he said. "No promises, no vows. Just this, wear it if you ever want to remember that you are loved without being owned, that someone is waiting, not because he needs you, but because he chooses to." Her throat tightened. "I'll come back. I believe you." She barely slept the night before her flight. Sophia packed her bags with care, tucking handwritten recipes into the side pockets of her suitcase. Lorenzo said little, but he sat beside her while she folded her last dress, watched her carefully tuck the ring box into the front zipper. At the airport, they didn't rush. They stood quietly by the gate, the world blurring around them. He pulled her close and held her tightly. When they finally let go, she pressed her forehead to his. 2 years. That's all. He nodded. I'll wait, even if it takes longer. She smiled. Oh, it won't. He kissed her, slow, deep, with the kind of certainty that didn't need proof. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a chain. The sapphire ring dangled from it. I'll wear it here, he said, fastening it around his neck, until you come back and decide what it means. She bit her lip, fighting tears. Don't fall in love with anyone else while I'm gone. He smirked, voice low. Too late, and then she was gone. The plane lifted, slicing through the clouds like a blade. Isabelle watched the vineyard vanish beneath her, her fingers tracing the outline of the ring in her pocket. She didn't know what the future held, but this time she wasn't running. She was flying toward something entirely her own, and somewhere in the hills of Napa Valley, a man stood on his balcony, hand over his chest, waiting. The vineyard didn't change overnight, but something in the air did. After Isabelle left, the Moretti estate returned to its quiet rhythms, harvests, meetings, long walks through the vines. But every room, every corridor carried her imprint. The faint scent of her perfume still lingered in the guest room. Her sketchbook remained on the library shelf, open to a half-finished drawing of the fountain. And the piano, once silent, now played again by Lorenzo, who let the music come freely, even when it broke. And around his neck, the sapphire ring rested near his heart, a silent promise, a weight not of grief but of hope. Each morning he touched it, reminding himself she was real. Not a dream, not a memory, but a woman who had walked into his life, shattered and strong, and made him believe again. She wrote every week, letters from Milan filled with sketches and poetry, tales of cafes and professors who spoke in riddles. She described the rhythm of the city, the scent of roasted chestnuts, how her Italian had deepened, how she'd been invited to read her poem in a public square. Lorenzo read them slowly, carefully, like scripture. He never wrote back, not because he didn't want to, but because he knew her letters weren't requests, they were gifts. And he wanted her to soar without looking back too soon. Still, he saved every envelope, tied them with twine, and on quiet nights, with a glass of wine on the terrace, he reread them, imagining her voice in every word. Sophia noticed. He's breathing again, she told one of the gardeners. Not just surviving, living. Because of her? The man asked. Sophia smiled. Because he remembered what love is, when it asks for nothing in return. Time passed slowly, but not cruelly. Lorenzo poured himself into work, not as escape, but as legacy. He launched a foundation in Matthew's name, offering scholarships to children who had lost a parent. The first recipient was a 6-year-old boy named Luca, obsessed with stars. Matthew would have liked him. And so Lorenzo rebuilt, not from the ground, but from the ashes. Still, some nights were harder than others. Anniversaries, dreams, the quiet when he came home late, and no one waited at the top of the stairs. The soft clink of the ring against his chest as he whispered, I hope you're still dreaming. Meanwhile, in Milan, Isabelle was becoming. She walked through museums with her journal tucked beneath her arm, scribbled notes on forgotten poets and marble saints. She presented a paper on the feminine voice in Italian literature. Got published twice. She visited Florence, stopped at the very bookstore Lorenzo once described. There she found a worn copy of The Little Prince, in Italian. She mailed it to him with a single line inside. You taught me that every good castle needs a secret room. Mine was always you. He held that book for hours before opening it. By the time her second year neared its end, Sophia began preparing the house. She never asked if Isabelle would return. She didn't need to. She saw it in the way Lorenzo paced near the gate on Sundays, the way he checked flights from Milan, the way he trimmed the roses, himself that month, and then, on a warm spring evening, a silver car pulled through the gate. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He simply stood at the top of the stairs, hands in his pockets, containing a storm. The door opened, and there she was, Isabelle, hair longer, posture straighter, eyes brighter. Still her, entirely her, wearing a pale blue dress, holding a small suitcase and a bound manuscript. For a moment, neither spoke. They just looked at each other, across time, across change, across everything they had been and everything they now were. Then she smiled. You kept the ring. He touched the chain. Every day. She stepped closer. Did you wait? His voice cracked. I didn't know how not to. And then she was in his arms. Not as the girl he had once rescued. Not as the woman he had kissed and let go. But as someone who had returned by choice. He held her, breathing her in, letting the truth of her presence sink deep into his soul. She pulled back slightly and placed the manuscript in his hands. My thesis, she said. It's about how people rebuild their stories after they've been rewritten by pain. He opened to the first page and read the dedication. To the man who didn't rescue me, but reminded me I was never lost. And just before the sun dipped behind the hills, casting golden light over the vineyard, Isabelle whispered the words he had waited 2 years to hear. I'm home. The annual Moretti Foundation Ball was the most anticipated night of the year. Held in the heart of Napa Valley, beneath a vaulted ceiling draped in fairy lights and chandeliers. It was an evening built on memory and purpose, a tribute to Matthew, and now a celebration of futures still unwritten. Politicians came, artists, philanthropists, reporters, everyone who mattered, and plenty who only pretended to. But this year felt different. There was a hush in the air, a collective breath held. The guest list was deliberately tight, and in quiet corners rumors swirled. Would she be there? She hadn't come the year before. Lorenzo had stood alone on that stage, delivering his speech with the poise of a man who had learned to carry absence like a second skin. But tonight, she was coming. Lorenzo stood at the edge of the ballroom, dressed in a dark suit with a satin lapel, a single white rose pinned to his chest. Beneath his shirt, around his neck, the sapphire ring still hung, though he hadn't touched it once that night. His hands were steady, but his eyes kept drifting toward the entrance. Sophia noticed. You've waited long enough, she said softly. He gave her a quiet smile. 1 more minute won't kill me. The music swelled. The lights dimmed slightly. And then, like the moment before an overture begins, the room fell silent. She entered. Isabelle, wearing a deep red gown that held her like a secret, her hair swept into a soft knot, her lips the color of aged wine. She didn't walk in. She arrived, as if the whole evening had been waiting for her to begin. The crowd parted without being asked. She didn't look left, didn't look right, only forward, until she saw him. Their eyes met across the ballroom, 2 fixed points in a sea of movement, and in one heartbeat, every letter, every ache, every late-night whisper returned. She stepped onto the dance floor. He met her halfway. They didn't speak. Lorenzo took her hand and in one fluid motion drew her into the music. Their bodies moved as if no time had passed. His hand on her waist, her head just close enough to rest near his shoulder. The world watched in reverent silence, but they didn't notice. This wasn't performance. It was home. You're real, he whispered. She smiled, and I'm staying. He exhaled. The tightness in his jaw finally released. I almost didn't believe you'd come tonight. I almost didn't, she admitted. I didn't want to be part of the story unless I could tell it myself. He looked at her, eyes soft. Then tell it, Isabelle. Start now. As the music faded, Lorenzo gently released her hand and turned toward the stage. The MC stepped aside without hesitation. Lorenzo took the microphone. His gaze swept across the room and then returned to her. This evening began as a tribute to someone I lost, he said, voice calm but resonant. My son, Matthew, taught me that love doesn't vanish when someone leaves. It lingers, it waits, and sometimes it returns in ways we never expect. He paused, heart pounding. I spent years believing some wounds never close. That healing was for other people. But then, one day, someone walked into my life, not to fix me, but to show me I wasn't broken beyond repair. He stepped off the stage and walked back toward her. I made a promise once, he continued, to wait, no pressure, no expectations, just hope. Then in front of everyone, he reached beneath his shirt and pulled out the chain. The sapphire ring caught the light like fire, and he dropped to one knee. The room gasped, but Isabelle didn't. Her eyes filled, but her hands remained steady as he took hers. I'm not asking for forever, he said, just for today and the chance to keep choosing you every day after. Will you marry me, Isabelle? Tears slipped down her cheeks. She nodded, barely whispering, "Yes." The ballroom erupted, applause, cheers, laughter, Sophia, clapping with both hands over her heart, strangers wiping their eyes, musicians picking up their instruments with new energy. But Lorenzo and Isabelle heard none of it. He rose and kissed her, not a kiss of spectacle or passion, but of truth. As they danced again, now as fiancé, she leaned in and whispered, "This time, I'm the one choosing you," in front of everyone. He smiled against her temple, "And I'm still the man who stood up when you needed someone. Except now," she whispered, "I don't need saving. I just want you." The chandeliers glittered above them. Music floated through the golden air. Around them, the world kept spinning, but they stood still, two souls, who had weathered storms and now stood in the light. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight was theirs. The ballroom faded behind them. After the applause, the toasts, the swirling congratulations, Isabelle and Lorenzo slipped away hand in hand, barefoot on the dewy grass of the vineyard, still dressed for a gala, but wrapped now in something simpler, peace. They walked in silence, the moonlight brushing the vines, their shadows long and intertwined. The sapphire ring now sparkled on her finger, no longer a symbol of waiting, but of arrival. It belonged there now. They stopped beneath the old fig tree at the top of the hill, the place Lorenzo had always gone to think, the place Isabelle had once found him lost in thought. Tonight he was no longer lost. She turned to him. "Do you remember what you said the night I left?" He nodded. "I said I'd wait." "And you did," she whispered, "even when the world moved on." He touched her cheek. "You were never something to move on from." The truth of it sat between them, weightless and sacred. They sat on the blanket someone had placed beneath the tree, Sophia, surely, and watched the valley breathe. Fireflies blinked near the vines. The music of the party drifted faintly in the distance. "What happens next?" she asked. He didn't hesitate. "We live, but not like before." "No," he said. "Like we earned it." There was silence, full not empty, rich with everything they had become. The girl once left behind, the man once shut down, now side by side in the stillness of a love that wasn't forced, but chosen. He handed her a folded piece of paper. She opened it carefully. It was the original contract, the one that began it all. She read the first line and smiled. No romance, just presence. He took it back, tore it in half, and let the pieces fall into the grass. "No more contracts," he said. "Only choices." She kissed him, softly, surely. The way you kiss someone when you've stopped running. Later that week, the story exploded. The Billionaire and the Abandoned Bride. A love story written in silence. Photos from the gala filled magazines. Publicists called. Publishers offered book deals. Event planners begged to host the wedding. Everyone wanted a piece of the fairy tale. But Isabelle declined every interview. She knew the real story wasn't about luxury. It was about quiet mornings in the vineyard, about letters never answered but always read, about a woman who found her voice in the ruins, and a man who learned to love again without needing to be needed. Their wedding was small, close friends only. Sophia in a dusty rose dress, a string quartet beneath olive trees. Isabelle walked barefoot down the aisle, jasmine in her hair. No veil, because there was nothing left to hide. Lorenzo waited with the same look he'd worn the night he knelt in front of hundreds. Except now, his hands trembled slightly. When she reached him, she whispered, "You're shaking." "I'm terrified," he confessed. "Of what?" "Of not loving you enough." She smiled, eyes soft. "You already have." They didn't exchange traditional vows. They spoke from memory, from letters, from the silence that had become their language. "I choose you," she said, "not because you saved me, but because you never tried to erase my pain. You saw it and stayed, and I choose you," he replied, his voice thick. "Because you made silence beautiful again. Because healing is quiet, and it begins when someone looks at you and says, 'I see you.'" They kissed before they even finished. Sophia clapped through tears. The guests followed. As the sun set, Isabelle stood barefoot on the stone steps of the house. This was where it had started. Broken, betrayed, alone, but it was also where she had risen. Lorenzo joined her, slipped his hand into hers. "You ready?" he asked. For forever? She teased. No, just for now. She smiled. Then yes. They walked down the path toward dinner, dancing, and the rest of the night. And Isabelle looked up. No signs, no stars aligning. Just stars, steady, silent, present, and deep inside her, a quiet truth pulsed like a prayer. This is what it means to be seen, and to be loved without conditions, without noise, without fear. She was left in front of the entire world, and found love again in the silence of the one who chose to stay. Because sometimes, a true fairy tale doesn't begin with once upon a time, but with a promise made in silence, and fulfilled with time. And maybe deep down, this story is also about us. If this story touched your heart, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments, where are you listening from? Your support is what keeps this channel alive, and stories like this reaching you.